You are listening to Hold Fast, a podcast where we have biblical truths for daily battles. My name is Kenny. I'm the host of the podcast, and I'll apologize right off the bat because I am not recording this episode in my office with my microphone. I am sitting on my back porch with just my computer and the microphone on my computer, which means that the audio quality may not be quite as good, but also it means that you're probably going to hear some background noise like birds, and we live next to a small airport, so you're probably going to hear a plane or two fly by. I feel like every time I try to do something like this, an ambulance likes to go by as well. So anything in the background, do your best to tune it out. I mean, MacBooks now have a feature where you can do like voice isolation. So I do think it'll block out some of the noise, and it'll be better than the computer microphone used to be for sure. But just wanted to make sure to give you a heads up. You're not going crazy. There are probably some noises in the background as we go through this episode. So this is the third week of a 4-week series where I'm walking through our church's newly refreshed mission, vision, and values. And what I've been doing throughout the sermon series at MissionWay Church is, for the sermons, I'm just digging into the biblical basis for this mission, vision, values that we have presented. And then in our discipleship groups at MissionWay, we're having further discussion about those things and how you can begin to apply them, and challenging one another and encouraging one another in those things. And then here on the podcast, I'm just really doing a deeper dive into the language itself of the mission, vision, and values, and how we got here, what we mean by some of these things, and just a deeper understanding into the language that's being used. And so I've said throughout this podcast series that even if you're not a member of MissionWay, I think there's value here because we're really just talking about things that the church as a whole should be about. Now, we're obviously talking about a lot of things unique to MissionWay Church, but I mean, really, we're not striving to be different than other churches as much as we're striving to be faithful to the scriptures. And so I would hope and pray that even if you're not a member of MissionWay Church, there's a lot of value here in seeing, even today's episode, as we talk about the marks of an everyday disciple. I mean, we're going to be talking about really some of the basic tenets of the Christian life. So you don't have to be familiar with MissionWay Church for this to be applicable for you. And I think, in fact, even if you're not a part of MissionWay Church, I think there's some really good tools for you to use, some questions for you to be asking that we'll go through yourself as a follower of Christ that we'll go through in this episode. So I pray that it's an encouragement no matter where you find yourself. And obviously, especially, I pray that for the people of MissionWay Church, that this is just another resource to help you continue to plug into the life of our church. Continue to ask God to lead you as you seek to be a faithful member of MissionWay Church. So let me dive into the marks of an everyday disciple. So right off the bat, we have 4 marks of an everyday disciple. They are faithful follower, intentional disciple maker, bold witness, and sacrificial servant. Faithful follower, intentional disciple maker, bold witness, and sacrificial servant. These are simply what we believe to be 4 main areas that we would hope to see disciples grow at MissionWay Church. The language that they used as we talked about this in our praying and planning sessions was, what does a dream disciple look like? What does somebody look like who's been at your church for quite some time and they've been discipled, they've been poured into, and they are following Jesus? What would they look like? So by no means are these 4 things some exhaustive list of everything that a Christian is supposed to be. But these are areas of particular focus for us at MissionWay Church. And these are things that we are hoping and praying and striving to see in each person who calls MissionWay Church home. So really, these can be used as measures for your spiritual life. So am I growing in these areas? These are 4 main areas that we would hope that each person at MissionWay Church consistently asks the question, am I growing in these areas? And one of the things that we've done with these marks is that we have put reflection questions under each one. We put what I would call discipleship questions under each one. Questions that you can ask yourself, and they're questions that you can ask another believer, and really dig deep on these things and ask, am I doing these things or not? So what I want to do in this episode is just walk through each one. And I want to challenge us on each of these and to begin to get us to understand what do we mean by each of these marks? What are the things that we should be looking for? What are the ways we should be growing in these areas of our lives? So, first, we would desire that people become faithful followers. And the definition that we've put of a faithful follower is one who places Jesus at the center of everyday life. One who places Jesus at the center of everyday life. Jesus is not like first on the list of our priorities. He is our ultimate foundational priority. He is the one from whom all of our other priorities flow. So I'll sometimes say it this way, it's not as if you have God first and then family and then church. It's God overall and in all and through all, right? He is the one who defines all these other relationships and responsibilities that we have in life. So a faithful follower of Jesus is one who places him at the center of everyday life. And that phrase everyday life is important. It's not just Sunday, right? We use the phrase sometimes at MissionWay. We want you to go beyond Sunday in your faith. We don't want you to just be someone who shows up to church, you sing, you hear a sermon, and then you just go about your week and you wait until next Sunday to consider your faith again. But every single day we're following after him. We're spending time in the word. We're spending time on our knees. We are a faithful follower. So here are the questions that we have under that. First one is, how are you prioritizing your time? And how does your schedule reflect that? So here's what we mean by that question. How would you, what would you say are your priorities, right? I just sort of used an example of maybe you would say, well, God's first, and then my family, and then my church, and then my job. And you might have this list of priorities, if you will, in your life. So does your schedule reflect that? Does your schedule reflect that Jesus is the center of everyday life, that God is first in your life? Does your schedule reflect that you really prioritize your family because of your relationship with Christ? Does your schedule reflect that your church is a really important part of your life in following after Jesus? I mean, these things need to be reflected in our schedule. You know, you can say all day long that you're prioritizing your relationship with Jesus, but if the only time you spend with him is an hour on Sunday mornings, can you really say that he's at the center of your everyday life? I don't think you can. And that's a question that we need to consistently ask ourselves. Look at your calendar. Look at your calendar and the things that you did last week. If somebody were to look at that calendar with no other context, could they tell that you place Jesus at the center or strive to place Jesus at the center of everyday life? And the second question we put under this is a little bit more positive in nature, right? That first one is pretty convicting, and it's designed to be. The second one, hopefully, is more encouraging. What area of your life are you seeing the most gospel fruit? Where in your life, what part of your life are you seeing the gospel at work? Are you seeing the work of sanctification happen? What part of your life can you say that you've been growing the most? What is God doing in your life right now? This is a question we should consistently ask ourselves, and it's a great question to ask somebody else, right? Rather than just ask how are things going. If you're sitting down at lunch or over coffee with somebody, another believer in Christ, a great question to ask is, tell me where you're seeing the most fruit in your life. What area of your life are you seeing the most gospel fruit? The next mark of an everyday disciple is an intentional disciple maker, one who intentionally equips others to be faithful followers. So, if we all want to be faithful followers, and the mission of our church is to equip one another, then we had better be intentional disciple makers. We had better be intentionally pouring into other people. A question that we put under this one, you've heard me ask before. Who who are your Paul, Timothy, and Barnabas? If you don't have them, how will you find them? So, who's your Paul? Who is that person in your life who's maybe a little bit more spiritually mature than you, who is pouring into you, who is discipling you, right? Who's your Timothy? Who are you discipling? You may be a little bit further along in your faith than them. How are you pouring into them? Who is it that you are coming alongside of in that way and pouring into them and helping them grow in their faith? And who's your Barnabas? That faithful friend who is iron sharpening iron in your life. You are discipling one another. You're at similar places in your walk with Christ. Who are your Paul, Timothy, and Barnabas? And if you don't have them, how will you find them? And then the second question under being an intentional disciple maker is, how are you living out the one another's of the New Testament? Love one another, pray for one another, bear one another's burdens, consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, bear with one, right? All these things. How are you doing them? How are you living them out? Not just are you living them out, because it's easy to say, well, I'm trying to, but how? In what way can you say this last week you lived out one or a few of the one another's of the New Testament? Because somebody who's an intentional disciple maker is striving to pour into other people, striving to minister to other people, striving to disciple other people so that they too would be faithful followers. The next mark of an everyday disciple is a bold witness, one who embodies the notion of always going, right? That's a book that we read pretty recently here at MissionWay and went through together. The title of it was Always Going. It was this life of overflow, everyday evangelism. So, a bold witness is one who embodies the notion of always going, boldly and consistently sharing the gospel in love. And here's a great question under that one, a great discipleship question. Who is close to you but far from God that you're praying for, investing in, and inviting into your life? How often are you doing so? Who is close to you but far from God that you are praying for, investing in, and inviting into your life? And how often are you doing so? Think about at least one person. Maybe it's multiple for you, but at least one person in your life that you know is lost, that you are close to. Either maybe you're close to them relationally, right? It's a family member or a friend, somebody you know well. Maybe you're just close in proximity to them. Maybe it's a neighbor that you know is lost, but you haven't gotten to know them yet. You haven't built a relationship yet, but you have an opportunity to. And you know that you should be praying for them and investing in them. Who is it? And how often are you reaching out to them? How often are you seeking to share the gospel with them? Not just, it's good. We try to live a good Christian life in front of these people, and that's great, but not just like living the gospel in front of them, but actually telling them the gospel. Because a bold witness is sharing the gospel in our actions, yes, but also in our words. You actually have to tell them the gospel for them to hear. And then the second question under a bold witness is, where are you taking the gospel beyond Sunday? Again, it's not just showing up to church and waiting until the next Sunday. When we gather to worship and fellowship and encourage one another, but then we leave the church to go be bold witnesses. We'll leave the church to go be the salt and light that Jesus told us that we are. And we carry the gospel beyond Sunday, where we live, work, and play. And if you're not carrying the gospel beyond Sunday currently, where can you start? What is the most obvious, clear next step you can take to begin being a bold witness wherever it is you live, work, and play? And the final mark of an everyday disciple is one who is a sacrificial servant. So, sacrificial service was actually one of our values recently before we just updated everything. And so that's still a part of our DNA, right? Sacrificial service. We desire people to be sacrificial servants, one who generously sacrifices of their time, talent, and treasure for Christ and his church. Right? Sometimes people think, the church is just all about money. We just want people to give money. Well, giving is actually one of the spiritual gifts. Financial giving is a spiritual gift. And the Bible commands us to be joyful and cheerful givers, not giving out of compulsion, but give joyfully as the Lord leads. But that doesn't just include finances. I think we can sometimes focus too much on we need people to give financially in order for the church to thrive. We need people to give their time. We need people to give their spiritual gifts. God has given you a spiritual gift to give back to your church, to sacrificially give back to your church. That's an important word, because we don't just want people who serve when they have time or when they are at full capacity and they feel like, oh, everything in my life is going just perfect. Now I can serve and I can give. No, no, no. We're called to be sacrificial in our service. We're called to lay aside our pride, our desires, our wants, our preferences in order to serve other people. And so there's two very, I think, revealing questions, discipleship questions that go along with this one. The first one is, if God called you to serve in a significant way today, how would you make the time and where would you find the resources? We got to think about this. Sometimes we just think, okay, the church is asking me to serve, so I'll serve and I'll just figure it out. No, no, no. We need to be intentional about this. We need to be willing to sacrifice certain things in our lives to make time for this. We need to be willing to sacrifice certain preferences and even sometimes certain resources in order to make room for serving Jesus through the church or in the church, right? We need to be able to be intentional about this. So if God called you to serve, and by the way, he calls all of us to serve. He calls all of us to use our time, talent, and treasures to serve his church, serve him and his church. So he's calling you to do that. How are you going to make the time and where are you going to find the resources to do that? And the second discipleship question, the final one we're going to go through today, under sacrificial servant is, what would be missing from your church if you were gone tomorrow? I'm actually going to ask that question in my sermon this coming Sunday at MissionWay Church. What would be missing from your church if you were gone tomorrow? That's a very important question to ask, because I'm not necessarily asking who would miss you, because my hope and prayer is that everybody would miss you, right? We are the body of Christ, and when a part of the body is missing, the body suffers, right? So you'd be missed if you were not there tomorrow. But like, what ministry would be missing from your church? And I'm not just asking what role on a certain team at the church would now have a vacancy. Like, who would miss your service, your ministry, the love and the sacrifices that you make for the church? Who would look around and go, there's something really missing. What's missing here with this person missing from our church? I think that's a great question to ask, because if you're not sure what the answer to that is, it may be that you're not really walking as a sacrificial servant. If you're not sure what would be missing from your church if you were gone tomorrow, other than just your body and a seat during the service, then I think that's something we need to seriously consider. How do I need to step up? How is God calling me to serve? And if He is calling me to serve, where am I going to make the time? How am I going to make the time? And where am I going to find the resources? So these are what we've identified as 4 marks of an everyday disciple. Again, this is not everything in the Christian life. This isn't everything we're called to, but we think these are 4 very important, even in many ways, primary areas that we want to focus on in discipleship. Because if somebody is a faithful follower of Jesus, intentionally making disciples, bold in their witness of the gospel, and sacrificially serving, you're covering a lot of the Christian life in those categories. I think it's a great way to kind of summarize a large part of what we are called to as Christians, as followers of Jesus Christ. So I pray that you would take these, not only these marks, but these questions. What I've been challenging our church to do is find somebody in the church who you can commit to for 4 weeks, or maybe 8 weeks every other week, and take 1 mark each week with the questions underneath, and just ask one another those questions and honestly answer, and then commit to helping one another do those things better. Help to commit or commit to helping one another walk in these things more faithfully. If you do that, you're going to be covering the intentional disciple maker piece, and you're going to be seeking to cover the faithful follower piece, right off the bat. Just by meeting with someone consistently and asking these questions, you're already growing in those 2 areas. And I think in many ways you can say you're growing in the sacrificial service area, because you're committing your time to sacrifice for another brother or sister in your church, to pour into them and disciple them. And that is sacrificial service in many ways as well. So it's an incredible opportunity that we have just to simply commit to asking these questions of one another on a consistent basis. And that's why we wrote them. We're going to, at some point in the pretty near future, provide a longer list of more discipleship questions that'll be on the website, available for you to use in your relationships with one another. But this is a great start. And I hope that our church is consistently asking these questions of ourselves and one another as we seek to demonstrate and faithfully walk in the marks of an everyday disciple. I pray that this has been a really practical episode. I know that we're talking a lot about just our spiritual growth, and sometimes we can talk a lot about like what we're supposed to do, but not talk about like how we should do that. And I pray that these questions and the conversation on this episode are very practical and give you something hands-on that you can begin doing today. That was part of our hope and how we wrote these. That was my hope in this episode today. And if it was encouraging and helpful, share it with somebody, especially with somebody at MissionWay Church. Challenge them to listen to this episode. And maybe it's somebody who is a Paul, a Timothy, or a Barnabas in your life, where you can say, hey, why don't we go through these questions together? Why don't we take 4 weeks or 8 weeks, once every other week, and just have lunch or coffee and ask these questions of each other? Start there. That's not a huge commitment. That's not some massive chunk of your life that you're giving up, but I think it would produce tremendous fruit in your life if you really commit to it, and really strive to do that. And then when you finish that, continue the relationship, continue meeting and discipling one another. Or maybe you say, you know what, I did this with one person, let me do this with somebody else. Let me get to know somebody else in the church. There's many different ways you can approach this and use these marks and these questions as a tool for discipleship in your life as you seek to faithfully serve, sacrificially serve, even here at MissionWay Church. Thanks for listening to this episode. Lord willing, I'll be back next week with closing out this series of podcast episodes talking about our strategy, right? What is our strategy for all of these things? How are we going to execute all of these things that we've been talking about as a church? And what's next for the life of our church as well? And so I hope that you'll listen to that and be ready to engage in that. And come this Sunday at MissionWay Church. If you're listening to this before Sunday, October 26th, I pray that you would be there on that Sunday, because that's going to be an important day as we close out this vision series. And really, this is just the start of all of this, right? Closing out the vision series doesn't mean we're done with this. This is just the beginning of these conversations and the changes that are coming in this next chapter of MissionWay Church. We're excited about those things, but I hope you'll be there Sunday, because I have something very important to share with you. I have something that I'm going to challenge you in pretty specifically, and I hope that you'll be there and be ready for that this coming Sunday. Hope you have a great rest of your week or weekend or whenever it is that you're listening to this. And Lord willing, I'll be back next week with another episode. God bless.